Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz. Brandis Friedman has the evening off. On the show tonight,
we are very concerned.
Officials have their eyes on rising COVID cases just as the vaccine is becoming more readily available. What President Biden's much anticipated infrastructure plan could mean for Illinois and Chicago.
To them it's something little, but to us it's something big.
Two bills in the General Assembly could expand Illinois' earned income tax credit. What that proposal could mean for low-income households. A local lawmaker is tied to the COVID vaccine scandal at Loretto Hospital. That and more from Cranes. New bidders step in an 11th hour bid for control of Tribune publishing. Can industry and healthy neighborhoods coexist? We take a look at manufacturing on Chicago's southeast side.
A lot of guys will say, oh, that's not real fishing. Don't have a fishing pole, it's not real fishing.
And a controversial yet popular local fishing style that makes use of a fire extinguisher. We learn more about powerlining. But first, some of today's top stories. The jury trial of the former Minneapolis police officer charged in the death of George Floyd began today. Derek Chauvin has pleaded not guilty to charges of second-degree unintentional murder of Floyd after kneeling on his neck for more than 9 minutes. He's also charged with second-degree manslaughter and third-degree murder. Here's a bit of what the prosecution and defense had to say.
Doesn't get up even when the paramedic comes to check for a pulse and doesn't find one. Mr. Chauvin doesn't get up. You will see that the paramedics have taken the gurney out of the ambulance, have rolled it over next to the body of Mr. Floyd, and you'll be able to see Mr. Chauvin still does not let up.
Dr. Baker found none of what are referred to as the telltale signs of asphyxiation. There were no bruises to Mr. Floyd's neck, either on his skin or after peeling his skin back to the muscles beneath.
Mixed messages today from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Officials say they're encouraged by the effectiveness of the COVID-19 vaccines out in the real world versus in controlled studies. Pfizer and Moderna found vaccines reduced infections by 90% in fully vaccinated people. In controlled testing, the vaccines were about 95% effective in preventing COVID-19. But the CDC director expressed dire concerns today over a fourth wave despite the vaccine rollout.
I'm going to reflect on the recurring feeling I have of impending doom. We have so much to look forward to, so much promise and potential of where we are, and so much reason for hope. But right now I'm scared. Just please hold on a little while longer. I so badly want to be done. I know you all so badly want to be done. We are just almost there, but not quite yet.
And back here in Illinois, health officials announced more than 1,700 new and probable cases of COVID-19 and 5 additional fatalities. That brings the total number of known infections in Illinois to more than 1,239,000 and the statewide death toll to 21,256. Health officials also report the statewide positivity rate is at 3.3%, a rate that is creeping up and keeping Illinois from opening up further. And speaking of, Chicago has opened the door to get the coronavirus vaccine to a vast majority of city residents now. Eligibility is also looser elsewhere throughout the state, but the COVID case numbers you just heard are rising at a pace that has officials at all levels of government concerned. Amanda Vinicky joins us now. Amanda, how much of a concern?
Well, Paris, just weeks ago, Chicago was seeing COVID cases decline. You were seeing about 200 or so people test positive for COVID daily, and then the positivity rate, well, hovering around 2%. Now, about 400 people a day with COVID, and that positivity rate has doubled.
Yes, so we're certainly seeing a rise in cases. It's not to the point that we were seeing in November, but it's something that we want to closely follow. We're very concerned about what the outlook may be over the next 4 to 8 weeks.
The mayor says that increase in cases is attributable to spread among 18 to 39-year-olds and also coming from the north and northwest sides of the city.
In our Lincoln Park, Old Town, Dunning, and Portage Park neighborhoods. We've also seen a number of outbreaks involving younger people among sports teams and as a result of bar crawls. And let me be clear, it's not the playing of the sports or being at bars that is causing these outbreaks. It's the risky behavior in those settings that's creating the problem.
Now, the alarm isn't just in Chicago. Per Governor J.B. Pritzker's reopening guidelines, the state can loosen restrictions. Some get to a bridge phase once 70% of seniors have been vaccinated. Now, it's not, by the way, a full reopening and life back to normal, but it will be a bit more relaxed. Conventions and sizable outdoor gatherings will be allowed then. Illinois is on the verge of that, with 69% of those age 65 and older having been vaccinated statewide. But the Illinois Department of Public Health announced today that other crucial thresholds will hold back this bridge phase, and it's unclear for how long. That is up to people wearing masks, taking other precautions, keeping COVID cases down. IDPH today sending notice that because COVID hospitalization metrics continue to trend upward, the state has not yet met the conditions to move to the bridge phase. It comes, as you noted, as more people are eligible for the vaccine. In fact, 84%, so the vast majority of Chicago residents now eligible. As of today in the city, all essential workers can sign up to get a COVID shot.
Now, all essential workers, many of whom are union workers, and including restaurant employees, clergy members, construction workers, delivery drivers, and warehouse workers, whose hard work has ensured our city continues to endure despite the challenges of the pandemic, can get protected with the vaccine.
Also eligible now, those under age 65 who have certain medical conditions. You can find a full list on our website, but it includes conditions like cancer, heart problems, and pregnancy, also those with disabilities. Anybody who was eligible under prior phases, so healthcare workers, frontline essential workers, and seniors remain so. But that doesn't mean that it's going to be easy as pie to get a COVID vaccine appointment. They still may be hard to come by. And the city is saying that most residents should expect to get a shot come April or May. Chicago clamping down on that too.
As vaccine supplies increase, everyone who wants a vaccine will get one. Additionally, beginning today, to ensure Chicago residents can better access vaccine appointments in our city, City of Chicago-run vaccination sites will only schedule appointments for Chicago residents.
Now, Chicago is a town where unions hold a whole lot of sway, and that is on display with the city's latest new mass vac site.
Here in Chicago and Cook County, I want to welcome you all to the first in-nation vaccination center run by the labor movement for union workers.
While only card-carrying members of labor unions can access and use this site, which is near Chinatown, eligibility is also expanding throughout Illinois. On Friday, the Pritzker administration announced that in some areas of the state, there has been a reduction in demand for the vaccine, so much so that those places are free to begin vaccinating all residents, anybody 16 or older, at the local health department's immediate discretion in order for the vaccine doses that they currently have to be used. The state says that in the future, it is going to work to divert future additional allocations of the COVID vaccine to places like perhaps Chicago, where demand is far outpacing supply. But when asked about that today, Mayor Lightfoot didn't have any concrete word on the city receiving any additional doses from the state or elsewhere throughout Illinois. She also indicated that with the rise in cases, she is not planning a total shutdown.
If you think about where we were a year ago and where we are now, we've learned a tremendous amount about this virus. Still a lot that we don't know, but we also know that we can do things in a more targeted way and not have to shut down the entire economy and our way of life.
Mayor today also asked about the scandal with vaccines at Loretto Hospital. She says it is not her place to say whether CEO George Miller should be terminated, but she says it is in the city's interest that Loretto Hospital continues to serve residents on the west side. She says, however, this drip of negative stories of vaccines going to places they shouldn't and to individuals with privilege as opposed to those who reside on the west side. She says that that is really hurting credibility at a time when the healthcare system needs people to believe in it more than ever so that people get that vaccine and this pandemic can end. Paris, back to you.
Thanks, Amanda. President Joe Biden is expected to announce details of a roughly $3 trillion federal infrastructure package later this week. Biden and Democrats hope the plan will rebuild crumbling infrastructure and set the country on a course toward a clean energy economy to tackle the challenges of the 21st century. So what could that mean for Illinois and Chicago? Joining us are Michael Storino, President and CEO of the Illinois Road and Transportation Builders Association, Kevin Arnold, President and CEO of the American Council of Engineering Companies of Illinois, and Reverend Larry Bullock, President and founder of the Barrington-based U.S. Minority Contractors Association. Welcome all of you to Chicago tonight.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So, Kevin Arnold, I'll start with you. $3 trillion expected out of this proposal. What do you think it will entail?
Well, hopefully it'll follow the framework of what we saw pass out of the House last year, which would be roughly about $500 billion for roads and bridges across the nation, with a lot of flexibility given to state DOTs. And I think when you look at Illinois, under what Governor Pritzker did in a bipartisan way with people like House Republican leader Jim Durkin, Illinois is very well situated with the Rebuild Illinois program to leverage the maximum amount of funds available.
This is the $45 billion capital bill they passed last year.
Correct.
And Reverend Larry Bullock, what are the most pressing needs in Illinois, would you say?
Well, unlike a lot of people, Paris, I think that we say infrastructure. We really need to reimagine the fourth industrial revolution. And so I'm concerned about bridges and roads, but I'm also concerned about wastewater management, wastewater treatment, obviously looking in the rearview mirror at Flint, Michigan. I'm also concerned about futuristic things such as 5G broadband, how we build that out, how we create jobs that can't be exported. And so when I hear infrastructure, I'm also keeping an eye on sustainability, climate control. Those are things that are important to my constituents, and those are things that are important to all Americans.
So infrastructure entails a whole lot of things, not just roads and bridges. But on the subject of bridges, Illinois has the most structurally deficient bridges in the nation, 8.8%, or about 2,374 of bridges in Illinois. Does that, Michael Storino, mean that all of those bridges are dangerous?
It does not mean that exactly, but they certainly need attention. I don't want to be an alarmist, but for too long, Illinois kicked the can down the road. And as Mr. Arnold said, through bipartisan efforts of Governor Pritzker and the Republicans in the General Assembly, as well as the Democrats, we're on our way to addressing it. But those are longer-term issues where IDOT is putting work out to the engineering community to address some of the most troubled bridges, but I wouldn't hit the panic button yet. With federal help and the Rebuild Illinois program, we're going to get out of that dubious distinction of being the worst in the nation in bridges.
Certainly a lot of bridges, a lot of examples that people could point to of crumbling bridges. Kevin Arnold, you mentioned the $45 billion infrastructure program, Rebuild Illinois, that Governor Pritzker passed on a bipartisan basis. How quickly could new federal infrastructure funding turn into jobs on the ground?
Oh, I think it could happen instantaneously. I mean, IDOT, and you've got counties now like DuPage County and Will County and Lake County and the city of Chicago, led by Alderman Vegas, who've taken action in the last 16 months to make their own investments in infrastructure. So Illinois has never been in a better spot to leverage federal funds and put more work out than at this point right now. So it truly is perfect timing to begin rebuilding and modernizing the service.
And Reverend Bullock, a lot of times in Chicago there have been problems diversifying trades unions, problems giving some of these contracts, making it diverse and equitable. Should a new infrastructure package, or would you expect this Biden package to include provisions in there for minority contracting?
I certainly would expect it, and I hope and believe that it would, unlike the prior administration that seemed to be allergic to diversity, inclusion, and equity. I believe that the DBE statute is clear that federal dollars bring with it a certain level of commitment to diversity, inclusion, and equity. When I look at the people that President Biden and Vice President Harris have surrounded themselves with, Janet Granholm, former governor of Michigan, now over in the EPA.
You talking about Jennifer Granholm?
Yes, responsible for equity, responsible for sustainability. I believe that. I said to one of your staff persons earlier today when we were doing the previous briefing that while it says 10% in DBE in some cases, I would hope that someone is foresighted enough in the United States Congress to perhaps even double that, because we are reaching a point where we're seeing racial disparities in healthcare, COVID-19, racial disparities in education, racial disparities in how we do our policing. And certainly I would think that President Biden and Vice President Harris will revisit the number on the DBE level of participation. And I know that in the state of Illinois, the Honorable J.B. Pritzker has done an outstanding job with the Rebuild Illinois program. And they have set levels for the Capital Development Board, the Illinois Tollway, and even in other areas where these are no longer aspirational, they no longer accept good faith effort of phony, malignant request, but that they are in fact demanding that the persons who do business in the state of Illinois and participate in commerce and industry honor those diversity, inclusion, and equity
and certainly
goals.
It could mean a lot of jobs. Michael Storino, what projects rise to the top in Illinois, and how does that work? Is it Congress people, lawmakers getting projects in their districts up for funding from this package?
Hey, that's a great question, and I echo Larry's sentiment. We're committed to an inclusive, opportunity-filled environment for road building as well. That, to me, it just made the news this morning. 5 people killed on the Eisenhower. The Eisenhower Expressway has also just been named the most congested in the country. The Blue Line there is in deplorable condition. It serves some of the most underserved communities in Illinois, if not the nation. We can do better. It was designed when it's named the Eisenhower, but it was designed when Eisenhower was president for 40,000 a day. It gets over 200,000 a day now. We can extend the Blue Line to get closer to job centers, to get folks to employment opportunities. We can make the Eisenhower work for all of Chicagoland. That's a multi-billion-dollar effort. And without this kind of commitment from the federal government, it might fall away. But earmarks are back in Washington, and there's no reason why Senators Duckworth and Durbin and the entire Illinois congressional delegation can't get behind something that really hits everything from transit to economic opportunity and empowerment and mobility and building something new, better, resilient,
so
and
the Eisenhower, one example there, and
yes,
extending the Blue Line, which has been talked about for many years. Kevin Artle, we mentioned at the top, the intent of this package isn't just to maintain things, but to build infrastructure for the 21st century. What exactly does that mean?
Well, I think Illinois engineers are at the forefront of that. And I think when you look at the opportunities here to not just rebuild, but modernize infrastructure, looking at ways to do smart road technology like the tollway did on I-90 and the Jane Addams, the opportunity to do dynamic charging stations on roads where electric vehicles can charge while they're driving. All these things are options now, especially with an influx of federal funding. It can really unleash the innovative genius of the engineering community and build roads ready for the 21st century.
All right, we'll have to follow this package. As we mentioned, the president is expected to unveil this on Wednesday. But for now, our thanks to Michael Storino, Kevin Artle, and Reverend Larry Bullock.
Thank you.
Two more investors have now stepped forward in a last-ditch effort to prevent hedge fund Alden Global Capital from taking control of Tribune Publishing. That's a company that owns the Chicago Tribune and 8 other papers. That is welcome news to journalists and readers that are worried about Alden's reputation for cutting newsroom staffs to the bone. Alden currently owns about a third of Tribune Publishing. It's offered $17.25 a share, valuing the company at $630 million. And the counteroffer, led by hotel magnate Stuart Bainum, is for $18.50 a share, a $650 million value. And joining us to talk about the fast-moving developments here are Charles Whitaker, Dean of Northwestern's Medill School of Journalism, David Jackson of the Better Government Association and former Tribune investigative reporter. He was part of an effort to find a buyer for the paper. And Gregory Pratt, president of the Chicago Tribune Guild, a spokesperson for the special committee of the Tribune Publishing Board evaluating the sale, declined to comment. Alden Global Capital did not respond to our request for a comment. We are grateful to have the three of you here. So where it stands now, Alden has a deal on the table to buy out the remaining shares of the company. Greg Pratt, remind us why journalists and other staffers at the Tribune are so worried about that.
Well, Alden Global Capital is just about the worst company in the news business. They're a hedge fund that wrings profit out of its newspapers without any real regard to investing in staff and coverage and making sure that things run well. The only thing they care about is wringing profits out of it and wringing more than is reasonable out of it. You know, I'm not speaking from a perspective of capitalism is bad. I'm speaking from a perspective of they're not really practicing capitalism. They're trying to, at least not in any strict way, because they don't care about the long term or the midterm. They only care about the short term, and they will cut the paper as they see fit.
And certainly they have done that to other publications they've owned around the country. David Jackson, you and your former colleague at the Trib, Gary Marks, you went on a crusade to try and find investors. You left the Tribune, but apparently an editorial you co-wrote in the New York Times caught the attention of billionaire Hans Jörg Wies. So you've got Bainum now, you've got Wies, and potentially a third investor. How promising is this?
Well, it's a very big step, but even with all this promising news for those investors and for Tribune Publishing and certainly the Chicago Tribune, there still could be a long, rocky road ahead, Paris.
And in a New York Times interview, billionaire Hans Jörg Wies, who is one of the two investors, step up, said, quote, "I don't want to see another newspaper that has a chance to increase the amount of truth being told to the American people going down the drain. Maybe I'm naive, but the combination of giving enough money to a professional staff to do the right things and putting quite a bit of money into digital will eventually make it a very profitable paper." Charles Whitaker, you heard David Jackson there say it could still be a long, bumpy path. What would have to happen for such a deal to go through?
Well, I don't know what will happen to make the deal go through. The long, bumpy path is the fact that this doesn't address the fundamental issue with local news right now, and that is that there is no business model. The question is, will angel investors have the stomach and the will to endure a long time of increasing losses in local news? That business model is irreparably broken. Display advertising, classified advertising is not going to come back. So the question is, are we going to support local news as a public good and not as a for-profit entity?
And you've studied this a lot, and you're saying that the business model really needs to be rethought. There's a lot of nonprofit models that are working out there. Greg Pratt, could Alden just decide to block this deal even though the proposal now is richer than what Alden itself is intending to do?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting, because Alden can cause problems for a sale, and Patrick Soon-Shiong, the owner of the LA Times, owns a significant amount of stock, and he can cause problems for Alden. And these guys can, so they can bid against each other, they can block each other, they can cause difficulties closing a deal for each other. And the question, though, for Alden is, do they really want to, do they want to deal with that, and do they want to deal with a situation where they're blocked on a full purchase? Because what we're talking about is they're attempting to buy out the whole company and make it private, and these guys are trying to buy it out from under them or buy out certain papers. And to what extent they think it's worth keeping and only having, the amount of control that they currently have, which is significant, versus owning it outright or selling it outright. It's a very complicated situation where I would imagine everybody in this dynamic has headaches often.
So it's not very clear what would be in Alden's best interest here, to still buy the Tribune outright, to sell it outright. We'll have to see how that shakes out. David Jackson, I want to get back to what Charles Whitaker said about models for profitability. Is there a path to profitability, sustained profitability for the Chicago Tribune, especially if you look at papers like the Washington Post, which Jeff Bezos bought, invested a lot in it. It is profitable. Is that a model that the Tribune could go for?
Well, I think Charles was trying to make the point about local and regional newspapers, and I think it's a point that's well made. I respectfully reserve judgment about his point. I'm not in the business side of newspapering. I'm a longtime investigative reporter who's done the journalism from the trenches. I think that there may be new models emerging, both in the for-profit and the nonprofit world. Clearly, newspapers have to find a way to gather a new and robust digital audience, whether they're national like the Washington Post and the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, or whether they're regional like the many sister papers of Tribune Publishing. And again, I really want to stress to your audience, I'm not a business person, but I do think I would reserve judgment as to whether the model is broken or crippled or about to be reinvented. I think we're in a state of real flux where the future is I would say, to be determined in a way by the next generation of journalists.
And there's certainly lots of different organizations, especially including the one you're working for, and organizations like Block Club that are doing different models. Charles Whitaker, what about that Washington Post comparison? Is it just because that is a national paper? The Chicago Tribune has been a regional paper. I mean, important not just to Chicago, but to the Midwest.
Yeah, I don't think you can compare the national papers, the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal to the regional papers. You do have a national audience that has been willing to pony up and pay to receive that news. We haven't seen that model work as well on a local level. But one of the things that we haven't done is we haven't made the case to the general public that they should pay for news, that news is important and should be supported the same way that a WTTW or a WBEZ sort of makes the case to the general public that this is worthwhile and that you should pay for it. We have conditioned the public to believe that local news is like air and that it should be free. And we've got to change that mindset if we're going to create a sustainable.
And a lot of that is because in the past, news organizations did rely on classified and advertising revenue, which has dried up. Greg Pratt, there have been so many defections of journalists at the Tribune, including your former colleague David Jackson. Just give us a sense of how cut to the bone it is over there. I mean, it's like every day I hear of another great reporter leaving.
We have lost a lot of tremendous people, but there are a lot of tremendous people that remain. It's still an outstanding newspaper. It's just, it's still an outstanding newspaper, but we have lost a lot of people that are great journalists that we miss very much. And my concern is in stopping the cuts before they become too much, which is not to say that we haven't had a lot of problems or to minimize the losses. You know, David is one of the greats. We lost a great young talent in Jessica Villagomez recently, but there's a lot of great people and there's a lot of reason to stick with us, and the place can be saved and is worth saving.
All right, well, we're going to continue this discussion down the road. We'll see what happens with these proposals, but for now, our thanks to Charles Whitaker, David Jackson, and Gregory Pratt.
Thanks, Chris.
And up next, fishing with a fire extinguisher. We learn more about a unique local style of fishing called powerlining. And there's much more ahead on the program, including details about a state lawmaker involved in the COVID vaccine scandal at Loretto Hospital. But first, this time of year at Montrose Harbor, you'll see a lot of people lining the lakefront with fire extinguishers. But they're not putting out flames, they're fishing. Powerlining is a unique fishing style with local roots. Chicago Tonight's Evan Garcia recently hit the harbor to catch this story.
I started in about 2010, so about 10 years. I've seen people doing it before, but I never got into it, and some coworkers of mine were doing this. I thought it's fun, so I gave it a try.
Fisherman Florin De Leanu, a Romanian immigrant who moved to Chicago 22 years ago, is powerline fishing on Montrose Harbor. Just what is powerline fishing?
We start with weight. It's about 8 to 10 ounces that we launch about 200-300 yards, and then it's attached to a rubber band that extends, and this is what takes the power line and the bait out there. So when we're ready, we aim.
A burst of carbon dioxide from a repurposed fire extinguisher sends one line with 25 baited hooks soaring through the air and into the water. In Illinois, there's a 50 hook per fisherman limit. That allows those who powerline to send lots of bait far out for salmon swimming near the harbor this time of year.
You can buy salmon in the store. Even if it says like wild caught, whatever, it's still that's at least 1 week old.
On this chilly March morning, Florin said the conditions were getting better, but not ideal just yet.
Usually after the ice is gone, it takes about 2-3 weeks, and we need some warm temperature to bring the fish in. And usually the good indication is when you see the birds here, that means there's a bait fish, there's school of small fish, minnows and stuff, and the birds are feeding on them. So you know if the birds are there, they dive, that means the fish will be there too.
We're not seeing any birds out here
No,
today,
no
right?
birds yet.
But alas, a tangled line reveals a happy surprise for Florin.
And that's why my lines got tangled. See, it's a coho salmon.
Here on Montrose Harbor, the go-to resource for powerline fishers is the Park Bait Shop.
More people would do it if they weren't intimidated by it. It looks a lot harder than it really is. So
Owner Stacy Green sells powerline equipment, everything but the fire extinguisher for liability reasons. She says powerlining became popular soon after salmon were stocked in Lake Michigan more than 50 years ago.
the salmon were introduced sometime in the 70s. These guys started powerlining in the spring. Somebody came up with CO2 tank that they started shooting the weights out so they could get farther and use a few more hooks.
And while the harbor was packed with powerliners on this day, Stacy says not everyone's a fan of the fishing style.
And you'll get guys that are against having that many hooks and and against powerline fishing because they don't, a lot of guys will say, oh, that's not real fishing. Don't have a fishing pole, it's not real fishing.
I come up with my own design, a lot of stuff that my creation.
For Florin, who works as an engineer at a local hospital, powerlining gives him a chance to get creative with a homemade bait refrigeration system and a self-installed electric buzzer.
So if the fish bites hard...
For all his efforts, he actually doesn't have an appetite for fish.
Believe me or not, but I don't eat fish. My family does.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Evan Garcia.
Powerline fishing is technically allowed year-round in Illinois, but Stacy Green says fishing for salmon from the harbor is most popular right now in early spring before Lake Michigan warms up and the salmon head for deeper water. She says the summer is the perfect time to powerline for perch, which she plans to do in a few months. And still to come on Chicago Tonight, a vote of confidence for Boeing as 100 of its 737 MAX jets are sold. Find out who the buyer is, plus other headlines from Cranes. Two bills in the General Assembly could expand Illinois' earned income tax credit, what that could mean for low-income households. And the Southeast Side has been a hub for manufacturing and a hotspot for environmental abuse. Can industry coexist with healthy neighborhoods? But first, some more of today's top stories. The jury trial of the former Minneapolis police officer charged in the death of George Floyd began today. Derek Chauvin has pleaded not guilty to charges of second-degree unintentional murder of Floyd after kneeling on his neck for more than 9 minutes. He's also charged with second-degree manslaughter and third-degree murder. There's a mass vaccination site coming to Gary, Indiana. The White House announces the new site will administer 2,000 vaccinations a day at the Community Vaccination Center at the former Roosevelt High School in Gary. An additional 1,000 doses per day will be allocated to mobile units that will host clinics in underserved communities throughout Northwest Indiana. The mass vaccination site will be open 7 days a week starting April 7th and then open 7 days a week for 8 weeks after that. An influential state legislator is tied to Loretto Hospital's COVID vaccine fallout. Boeing receives a big order from Southwest Airlines, and Allstate makes its exit from the life insurance business. Here to go behind the headlines is Crain's Chicago business editor, Ann Dwyer. Hey, Ann, so we'll start with the story that just won't go away. According to Crain's, Loretto Hospital staff members were instructed to vaccinate more than 80 people on a state representative's list. Who is the lawmaker?
Her name is Camille Lilly Paris, and in addition to serving in the State House of Representatives, she also serves as the Chief External Affairs Officer for Loretto Hospital. And Crain's has obtained a list of 85 names that sources say were sent to the hospital by Representative Lilly, and that most of the people on that list got vaccinated at Loretto despite not having made appointments online or by phone. Now, this news raises fresh questions about the fairness of vaccine distribution in Chicago, and it also does add another twist to an ongoing drama that has surrounded Loretto for a couple of weeks now, including revelations that associates of hospital insiders at places like Trump Tower and a luxury jewelry store may have gotten vaccines via Loretto, which of course is a community-based hospital whose primary mission is to serve the west side of Chicago.
And it kind of raises the question about lawmakers who both work at the hospital and then two who served on the board, one who resigned, State Representative LaShawn Ford. Let's move on to Southwest Airlines ordering 100 737 MAX planes from Chicago-based Boeing. First of all, Ann, you know, Boeing has been struggling, especially with this plane. So what does this deal mean for Boeing? And is it safe to fly on the 737 MAX again?
Well, regulators say it's safe, and I guess it depends on how much faith you have in what regulators have to say about it. But Southwest is Boeing's biggest customer, and this buy of 100 jets certainly is a sign of their faith that the 737 MAX is safe to fly. And this is a real lift for Boeing, which has been trying very hard to get the aviation industry to embrace this model, despite the earlier problems with an earlier version that was involved in 2 fatal crashes. The deal does strengthen Boeing's first quarter sales, of course, and it also seems to put an end to a very public flirtation that Southwest was doing with Airbus, which of course is Boeing's arch rival. Sources tell Bloomberg News, by the way, that Southwest didn't do this out of the goodness of their hearts. They got a pretty good bargain price on these planes.
Well, we'll see if folks feel good about flying those 737 MAXs, if they know indeed what plane they're flying. All right, let's move on to the third story here. One of the biggest companies in the Chicago area, Northbrook-based insurance giant Allstate, says it's exiting the life insurance business. Why is that?
Well, they have announced a deal to sell mainly because they want to simplify their investment portfolio. They want to focus on their more lucrative auto and life insurance lines. And so the deal that was announced today for just a slim portion of the life insurance business does indeed sort of put a cap on Allstate's long-standing involvement in the life insurance business. You'll remember that back in January, Blackstone Group stepped up and offered $2.8 billion for a large chunk of that life insurance business. Today came the news that a Connecticut-based insurance giant named Wilton Re had offered to buy the remainder of that business. So that does indeed put an end to the life insurance business for Allstate. It also frees up nearly $2 billion in capital that Allstate can now spend on either shareholder buybacks or acquisitions. So this isn't an altogether bad turn of events for Allstate at all.
All right, Ann, great stuff as always. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Paris.
Some more tax relief could be on the horizon for lower-income Illinoisans. Two bills in the Illinois General Assembly would expand eligibility for the Earned Income Tax Credit. The proposals call for more Illinoisans to be included in the program, and they appear to have bipartisan support. Tonight, as part of our First-Hand Living in Poverty series, we take a look at the credit and what it could mean for low-income households. And joining us to discuss the proposals are Harish Patel, director of the group Economic Security for Illinois. That's an advocacy organization leading a coalition of over 30 groups statewide in support of this measure. And Lisa Christensen-G, Director of Special Initiatives at the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy. Welcome both of you to Chicago Tonight. Lisa, remind us what the Earned Income Tax Credit is in Illinois and who is eligible to benefit right now.
Yeah, so the Earned Income Credit is a tax credit, which means it can help offset your Illinois personal income taxes or provide you cash if you don't have enough income tax that you owe for low and moderate income families that have income from earnings from work. So households that have under $60,000 may qualify. And Illinois has had this credit for 21 years and has taken steps over the last 21 years to strengthen it, to make it an even stronger economic security program. And it is tied to the federal Earned Income Tax Credit. Harish, how does money saved or reimbursed with the Earned Income Tax Credit affect low-income families?
Yeah, so, I mean, it's important to know that the Earned Income Tax Credit, as you just shared, is a federal program, and the state has a matching program. And most of what families do with that money is either pay off their debt, they're spending it in the community, they're buying things. And because it targets mostly low-income folks, they're just investing right back into the community and paying taxes on it. We know from data that most of them are creating a multiplier effect. For every dollar that we spend EITC, they're spending it and creating a multiplier effect around $1.50 to $2. And that's what ultimately makes Earned Income Credit a really effective anti-poverty program. So there's a stimulative impact here. Lisa, we mentioned the proposal to expand the Earned Income Tax Credit. So under these proposals, who now would be eligible?
Yeah, so under the House bills currently under consideration, if you're an 18 to 24-year-old or over the age of 65 and you don't have a child, you would newly become eligible for the credit. Similarly, there's a whole group of people who have qualifying incomes right now, but because they file their taxes and pay their taxes with what's called an ITIN number instead of a Social Security number, they currently don't qualify under federal eligibility rules, but these bills would allow them to also become eligible. So this could impact immigrant communities, as I understand, and caregivers would also be included in the expansion. We talked with a mother of 2 kids under 6 years old, Humu Isifu, earlier today about what the expanded credit could mean for her and her family. Let's listen.
The expansion can be tremendously helpful in many ways. I can lower some debt. I can also save some money for some rainy days, you know, get my car fixed, because I don't have no one that can help me. I don't have family members who have additional funds that can help me and my family. So this little bit of money can help a lot of families in many, many ways. To them, it's something little, but to us, it's something big. So, Harish, what effect could this expansion have on low-income families?
Look, Humu is exactly right. This expansion, like Humu shared, will impact a lot of our neighbors. When we did our analysis, it's almost 1.27 million more Illinoisans would qualify under our expansion plan. And so what that means is if you're a caregiver at home and currently you have to give up work or you reduce your hours and therefore possibly not qualify for the Earned Income Credit, this expansion bill that we're proposing will make you qualify and put up to $600 minimum credit into your pocket. And we know what that means for you, exactly what Humu said. She can pay off her debt, buy a car, invest in a home, and all of those have a multiplier effect to rebuild the economy.
All right, we spoke to someone that wasn't so crazy about these proposals, the president of the Taxpayers United of America, Jim Tobin. He said he is in support of the credit if all other welfare programs are eliminated, but here in Illinois, he's opposed. Here's a clip from him.
In Illinois, we shouldn't be increasing spending on this right now because Illinois is bankrupt. It is wasted the money that they've been spending. They've been wasting money on salaries and benefits for the government employees.
Lisa, no secret, Illinois does have budget troubles. How much could this cost the state of Illinois?
Yeah, so ITEP has scored the bill, and over a 2-year phase-in period, this will cost $130 million. The current program costs $400 million a year, and that $130 million is equal to less than a third of a single percentage point of the entire $40.6 billion budget that the state has for the current year.
So there would be a small cost to the budget, and the state would have to find a way to make up for that. Harish, we touched on how this could impact immigrant families that don't have Social Security numbers. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. And I want to kind of respond to the question you asked previously, which is, yes, it costs about $130 million over 2 years, but I want to reiterate, every zip code in the state of Illinois has somebody who gets the earned income credit. It has bipartisan support. Our bill has bipartisan support. Federally, when it was announced, had a bipartisan support because it's such an effective tool to put money into the pockets of people. And when we think through who else will qualify, yes, ITIN filers, which are individual tax identification number filers, will who currently do not qualify and have historically been left behind, both from the federal stimulus and here, will be qualifying under our proposal. They work, they pay taxes. Many of us probably know them. Those are the folks who would start getting a very small credit of, let's say, up to $1,200 a year from our expansion plan. In addition, when we did analysis ourselves, we know that Black and brown communities will qualify at a much higher rate because, unfortunately, many of them have jobs that are low paying in our state, right? And so because this is a focus on low paying or low earning tax benefit, that's who benefits the most.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. We'll see where these bills go. Our thanks to Harish Patel and Lisa Christensen-G. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, can healthy neighborhoods and industry coexist on the city's southeast side? That's a conversation from Saturday's Chicago Tonight Latino Voices with guest host Michael Puente, a reporter with WBEZ. But first, we take a look at the weather.
Throughout much of Chicago's history, the skyline of the southeast side has been smokestacks, and its residents worked at the manufacturers under them. But over the years, all that industry has taken a toll, harming both the natural environment and the health of residents. In recent months, the tension between industry and community has escalated as protests erupt against metal scrapper General Iron's proposed relocation to the southeast side. And while activists say the area has been overburdened with industry, some residents say they need the manufacturing jobs more than ever. Joining us now with more are Erica Swenny-Staley, Executive Director of the Chicago-based Economic and Community Development nonprofit Manufacturing Renaissance, and Gina Ramirez, activist and Midwest Outreach Manager for the Natural Resources Defense Council. Gina, let's start with you. This week, the Chicago City Council approved a measure tightening rules on industrial operations and recycling centers in an attempt to address air pollution in communities like the Southeast Side. What are your thoughts on that legislation?
The legislation doesn't go far enough. We have been trying to work on this legislation with the mayor's office for a few months, and a lot of watered down versions ended up getting passed. And so there really needed to be more community input in this process, which is something that we are always urging. And it is notable to note that 12 aldermen and all of the big greens within the Chicago area were against this ordinance because they didn't think it was strong enough either.
Erica, do you believe it's important to maintain a manufacturing presence in the city of Chicago?
Yes, in short. I mean, there is a crisis level unemployment, especially in Black and Brown communities, especially in youth and young adult populations. Currently, there are 58,000 jobs, manufacturing jobs going unfilled. Overall, these are high quality, good paying jobs. They offer diverse career pathways. I mean, everything from production, machining, but also going into STEM careers like in engineering and robotics and IT, and even up to ownership. Business ownership is an opportunity. So this is really a strategic sector, and actually it's going to be an especially strategic sector as part of advancing sustainable development, and especially in context of global climate change. So this is manufacturing jobs are really going to be part of our economy for a long time, and we need to get more of our community folks in these good jobs.
Well, let me ask you this as a follow-up. Do you think manufacturers who are planning to relocate to the southeast side and, say, the west side, do they need to do more to protect the environment and the residents there from pollution?
I think this is a much bigger problem than any individual company or even any individual community can solve independently. I mean, this kind of development is happening in context of environment that's already harmed. This is, any new development that's happening is in context of decades of concentrated environmental pollution, especially in communities of color, as a result of institutionalized racism in zoning and policies of that guide where these kind of companies can go. So these aren't pristine environments to begin with. So yes, I mean, so this is something that requires, and this is why we advocate for an industrial policy, that it's time to put a lot more planning and strategic planning in how and where we locate industrial development. We need it. We absolutely need these jobs. We need good jobs. We need clean jobs, but it needs to be in context of a much more regional perspective and not just, pitting one community or one community group against one business to hash it out, because oftentimes the community groups are the ones to lose out.
Gina, some activists sometimes point to the nearby Method factory in Pullman as an example of good actors in the neighborhood industry. What do you think they're doing right?
The Method factory is a really great example in Pullman. It brings economic vitality without being a hazard to the community's health. And we're at a crossroads right now. We can choose to continue to be on this path of abusing the land, air, and water in our communities, or we can bring jobs like the Method Pullman factory that are restorative and sustainable.
Well, Gina, these industries offer jobs with low barriers to entry in the neighborhood. What do you say to the argument that these communities need these kind of jobs nearby?
At the end of the day, our health should be a priority and not a subsidy to dirty jobs. So RMG claims to be a state-of-the-art facility, but with the bar set so low in Illinois in terms of laws and permitting, that doesn't really mean anything. Essentially, anyone that applies for a permit is going to receive one because of the way neighborhoods like the Southeast Side are zoned.
Well, Erica, the Southeast Side has historically been where very large industrial operations were located and seek to locate, but should Chicago be trying to attract smaller manufacturers instead?
That's a great question. I mean, and actually, Chicago has a really unique opportunity. Not unique, it's actually common around the United States. Most manufacturing companies are actually smaller, family-owned businesses. And actually in Chicago, just with some research, recent research, we found that about 2,000 out of 6,000 manufacturing companies in the Chicagoland area are in risk of closing just only because of lack of a successor. So these are companies already in our communities that hire our neighbors, that it's our neighbors who could be next in line to own these companies. These are jobs that already exist, and we think we should be working much more proactively to keep some of these smaller manufacturers in our community. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, smaller companies tend to be on the whole locally owned. They tend to be much more, have an identity with the surrounding community, and tend to be much more responsive and interested in learning and adapting to the needs of the community. So I definitely, that's who we've worked with over the years, and they are definitely a critical part of the sector that needs support.
Gina, we just have a short second, so I'll leave you with the last question. The Illinois International Port District is on the east side, and they're looking to expand operations, and their plan says it's balances community and the environment needs with the industry. Given the current and historic presence in the area, do you trust them to do what they say they're going to do?
Just from my past experience with all of the concentration of industry in our neighborhood, I want to give them the benefit of the doubt. And, we just really need to get rid of the toxic legacy that exists on the southeast side. So let's get to work.
Our thanks to Erica Staley and Gino Ramirez for joining us. Back to wrap things up right after this.
Don't ever miss Chicago Tonight. Subscribe to our podcast. Get a daily download of our show delivered to your desktop or mobile device. Go to WTTW.com/Chicago Tonight Podcast and subscribe.
Our thanks to Michael Puente of WBEZ. And that is our show for this Monday night. Please join us tomorrow night live at 7. And tonight, in just a few minutes, be sure to join our Latino Voices Community Conversation. WBEZ reporter Araceli Gomez Aldana will be joined by Latina leaders in Chicago. The conversation will shine a light on Latinas, the adversity they face in this country, and the role they hold in their communities. That's at 8 o'clock tonight. You can visit WTTW.com/events for more information. And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Closed captioning for this program is brought to you by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, dedicated to preserving the dignity and rights of all individuals.